Welcome to the first edition of Missing Link, and my guest is Professor Yanis Varoufakis. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Then please, as an introduction, give us a rough idea in which state Greece is right now. A few numbers, unemployment, health situation of the population, so a clear estimate of what is the situation.
I think two words: Great Depression. I think our audience understands very well what that means. GDP, national income, has been shrinking for 7 years now. This has never happened in an advanced economy before, such a long period of decline. And just to give our audience a feel for the madness of the policies that are being imposed as we speak today in Parliament in Greece. Small businesses will have to pay in the next month, and we're now in October 2015. By November of 2015, they will have to pay in advance next year's full tax on their estimated profits for the whole of 2016 this month. And this is in a broken economy where demand is extremely low. Most of those businesses are struggling to survive. So, in other words, we have a Great Depression which is getting greater. I think that's all you need to know.
In a way, I think we need to know more, because in Germany, most of the discussion that we had was along the lines of how should we treat, as a German state, the Greek debt. And we don't know really about the situation that the people are in. We, in this program, try to do a lot there. But this is why I asked for numbers. For example, what is the unemployment rate for young people, things like that, to get an idea.
Well, what you must understand is that the unemployment rate is exorbitantly high. It's now at 28%. But even that underestimates the reality, because the reality also includes at least 500,000 young people, very well educated people that the Greek state has educated for years. So it's an investment that has gone to waste, who have migrated. And when you lose that engine of growth, human capital, the unemployment figures become even more gruesome just to look at. Another number I can give you is that 1 in 4 families have people working in it. This is a complete catastrophe. You can imagine that. And I'm talking about full-time jobs now. Of the unemployed, only 9% have ever received a single euro worth of unemployment benefit. You want this once more? Of the unemployed, 9% have received a single euro of unemployment benefit. I'm not saying that they're receiving now, ever received, because there are people who've been unemployed for 5-6 years who are not eligible for unemployment benefit, but even they, most of them, have never received a single euro. So it's a broken down welfare state. It's a welfare state that provides no welfare for its people. It's a state which is utterly bankrupt. And the reason why debt is important is because it does two things. Firstly, it deters investment. Now, who in their right mind would invest in a state which has unpayable debt? And therefore, investors know that the state is going to be pushed by the Troika, by foreign creditors, to increase taxes further. So you know that your investment, even if it delivers revenues, those revenues are subject to increasing taxation from a cash-starved state. That's one reason why that is important, investment. The second reason why it is important is because it signifies, it's, if you want, a symptom of a major crisis where the debt is the byproduct. But it's a crisis of the functioning both of the private and the public sectors, and the conjunction between them and the European Union and the Eurozone.
How did Greece get into that situation? What is your analysis?
The answer has to come in two parts. The first part concerns Greece alone. So Greece has always been a problematic state. Since 1821, when we had a revolution, a few years later, the revolutionaries borrowed a lot of money from the Ricardo brothers, actually, famous economist David Ricardo, and his brother had a bank. So we had debt before we had a state. The state was instituted after the death and became a reality. And it was a very backward economy. We were ravaged by wars, by conflicts. We had effectively a long dictatorship that began in 1936 with the fascist coup d'etat of Yanis on the 4th of August 1936. And that, in a sense, ended in 1974. Because we had the occupation, the Nazi occupation, then we had the civil war, then we had a very dictatorial authoritarian state, and in 1967 we had the new fascist dictatorship, and that ended in 1974. So we had a very long period of effectively a non-democracy. So Greece emerged from this nightmare in 1974. And tragically, the 70s was a period of oil crisis, and because of the end of the dictatorship, it was a period when Greece, rightly, wisely, wanted to become part of the European family. But that meant the reduction of tariffs and quotas. So the nascent industry that began emerging in the 1950s and 60s suddenly had a double hit. The energy crisis, and it was a rather inefficient industry, so it suffered more than the German industry did as a result of the increase in the price of oil. And secondly, the end of the protection of that industry. So that industry collapsed. So by the time we were getting into Europe, into the European common market back then in 1980-81, our industry was collapsing. And private losses, as they usually do, become public debt. So Greece has always been teetering on the verge of an economic crisis. Sometimes doing a little bit better, sometimes doing a little bit worse, but always struggling to keep up with modernism, if you want. The second, however, reason is the Eurozone. Greece entered the common currency, the single currency, as the weak link of the single currency. The single currency was extremely badly designed, not just for Greece, but for everybody, including, I believe, for Germany. Mm-hmm. And a common currency, you can see this from what happened in the 1920s, with the gold standard at the time. You can see what happened to Mexico and Argentina when they linked their currencies to the dollar. They had a common currency with the United States dollar. You can see it from the period between 2000 and 2008 when we linked our currencies here in Europe. So when you create a common currency area, at the beginning there is exuberance. There is a period of growth because the common currency means that trade becomes much freer, there can be a lot more commercial intercourse, and also the important thing is money from the surplus countries flows into the deficit countries. Why? Because if you're a banker in Frankfurt and you are awash with money because of the trade surplus that a country like Germany has, you need to lend it. German households and German firms do not demand so much money, but the cash-starved companies in Spain, in Ireland, in Portugal, in Greece demand that money. So that money flows, and the fact that they demand it means that they are prepared to pay higher interest rates. So if you're a Deutsche Bank and you have all this money sitting there, you want to lend it to the Irish, you want to lend it to the Portuguese, to the Greeks. So that creates a semblance of growth in places like Greece. So in Greece, between 2000 and 2008, we had 5%, more or less, growth rates, whereas you in Germany had 1.5%. So we were the miracle economy, like Ireland was the miracle economy. Mm-hmm. But that was all bubbles, debt-fueled bubbles. And when the international crisis happened in 2008, just like 1929, same thing, began in Wall Street, the bubble burst, and then those bursting bubbles started moving from one territory to another. Suddenly, the Greek state could not refinance its debt, and then we entered that period of Great Depression. So you have the combination of a terribly designed currency union which had no shock absorbers for handling this crisis. It created irrational, debt-fueled pseudo-growth, Ponzi growth, as Americans would say, to begin with, and then when the bubbles burst, it created huge depression, with all the burden of adjustment falling on the weakest link. So the combination of the structural difficulties and weaknesses of the Greek economy that go back to the 19th century and the terrible currency area, you put them together, you have Greece's trials and tribulations today.
Before we come to the question of what could be done, there are a few things which, when I started to look into it, some people think that Greece is not really in such a terrible situation. It's a debt deflation, some people think. You have a very good fleet, the biggest merchant fleet in the world, in fact. Also a very good luxury hotel thing, where a lot of 4- and 5-star hotels are. And some people think Greece is in a situation where what you need is really refinancing, so that the banks have trust. Your Greek banks, not the international banks. People in Greece have trust in that. Is that analysis for you reasonable, or do you think it's off
very
track?
flimsy, very epidermic.
Okay.
Firstly, yes, Greeks own lots of ships and vessels, and we are very good in this sector. But this sector is Greek only culturally. It's not Greek in terms of our political economy. So the ship owners, their houses are in London, their companies are domiciled in Malta, in the Canaries, in Cyprus, in London.
And they don't pay taxes.
They don't pay taxes, and you can't really make them pay taxes because they're so flighty. The ships move. Their offices, their jurisdiction is not in Greece, mostly. So it is as if it's like on another continent. They may have their villas in Greece, they may spend their time in Greece, they may have their own private yachts in Greece, but they are not really part of the Greek economy. A part of the European economy, if you want, but Greece doesn't benefit from that. The question of tourism is of course important, but it's not sufficient. So you mentioned the debt deflationary cycle. Now that is the issue. And it is important to remember that when you have no capacity to devalue your currency, internal devaluation, which is the alternative. When you don't have a currency to devalue, what happens is you devalue your labor. So wages come down and prices come down. Some people think, well, that's the same, isn't it? But why is it different to have the drachma, which devalues, or to have the euro with wages and prices coming down? Well, there's a fundamental, huge difference that explains everything. In the absence of debt, there is little difference. But when you have debt, private and public, internal devaluation is catastrophic. Because your debt doesn't devalue. Your debt actually goes up. As long as you have positive interest rates, even if they're small, your debt mountain goes up. So when prices and wages come down, as a result of the debt deflationary cycle, your capacity to service your debt diminishes day by day by day. Everybody knows that. No one invests. So your GDP, your national income, shrinks faster and faster and faster. So you have a mountain of debt that is increasing, and you have a molehill of income which is shrinking. That's it. When you're caught in that spiral, you're finished.
Why was the reaction to the Syriza, I don't know how you say it in English, Syriza government so different? It was hateful to a degree than it was to the governments before, because Greece got into the problem long before Syriza came. It was not your responsibility. It was rather a reaction of the public to the problems that you had. But why do you think in the Eurozone, people like Wolfgang Schäuble and so on met you with such hateful responses?
It's understandable. It's sad, but it is understandable. Because we had the audacity to look at them in the eye and say, the program of fiscal consolidation and reforms that you have been implementing in Greece for the last 5 years was a disaster. It failed. Nobody likes to be told that they failed, especially if they are almighty and powerful. Yeah? So we were a pipsqueak little country, and we were a small party that went up from 4% to 36%, and we had the audacity to look at the Troika in the eye and for me to talk to Wolfgang Schäuble and say to him, you know, what you've been doing in Greece has been guaranteeing that you're not going to get your money back. Not because we don't want to pay it, but because if you keep hitting the cow, which is to produce the milk that you want, and you keep hitting it and it's sick, you'll kill it. You'll get no milk as a result. And at that point, you've got to realize that what we have is we have a chess game. And Greece is a small pawn on the chess board. At that point, the pawn was to be sacrificed. There were elections coming up in Spain, elections coming up in Portugal, elections are coming up in Ireland, and the merits of what we were proposing for Greece didn't matter. What mattered was that we get squashed, that we were taught a lesson, so that nobody dares again look at the powerful in the eye and say, you know what, the program you've been implementing is not going to succeed even from the creditor's point of view. What does a creditor want? They want their money back. Well, if you kill off our economy, you're not going to get it back.
It's another thing, I'm not a financial specialist. For me, the European Union was something that was running fairly well, and suddenly it was like a car crashing against the wall. We noticed suddenly, for me it was suddenly, and for a lot of my fellow countrymen too, that the European zone is not really democratic. There's something, you don't elect these people who can come to Greece and give orders what to do. It's like a coup d'etat. It's like a little bit like colonialism. I'd like to, can you explain who you had to deal with? The public voted for Syriza, and then came the European juggernaut and said, we don't accept what you do.
German people have a commitment to the idea of a well-functioning society that depends on rules that have been commonly agreed. Now, that is splendid. I believe that if our German audience were to come and take a look at how the Eurogroup works, they would completely and utterly rebel, because it is a democracy-free zone. What I mean by this is this. Firstly, think about it. The Eurogroup is the economic government of possibly the most significant economy in the world, the Eurozone. Yeah. All the important decisions that determine life not only in Greece, but also in Germany, are made there. Now, did you know that the Eurogroup doesn't exist in law?
No.
It's no European treaty refers to it. When I, at some point, disputed a decision of its president, I asked for a legal opinion. Does the president of the Eurogroup have the right to do what he had just done? And after a while I was told, officially, by a representative of the Secretariat, that the Eurogroup does not exist in law. It is an informal group, so there are no written rules, which means that the president can do anything he wants. Now, do the German people know that? Do they know that their economy is subject to decisions by a group that is not formally constituted, and there are no written rules? Because I believe that if they were to find this out, they would rebel against a set of circumstances which is utterly unfathomable. You mentioned at the beginning that for most of us, for most people, it seemed as if the Eurozone was doing fine until it crashed on the shoals of reality. That's how it looks. But think about it. All badly designed financial systems are like that. Yeah? In the 1920s, remember the roaring 20s? Germany had its own problems because of the Versailles Treaty and the hyperinflation. But the rest of the world in 1922, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28 was doing brilliantly well. Yeah? We had the highest growth ever with the creation of the big corporations, even in Germany. The networked companies, electrification, the telegraph companies, the railway projects, the first mega corporations were created with huge improvements in finance, the relationship between finance and industry, and then it crashed, 29, because it was badly designed, just like the Eurozone was badly designed. After the war, the Americans tried to redesign a financial system, a global financial system, learning from the mistakes of the 1920s with Bretton Woods. And they improved upon it very well. But in Europe, we didn't. From 1978, with Giscard d'Estaing and Helmut Schmidt, we created a monetary system which, by the time it gave rise to the euro, it resembled the gold standard of the 1920s and went exactly through the same process. The problem is this. When a crisis happens, and capitalism produces crises like it produces iPads and cars, it's part of the process. Let's accept that, right? Let's even admit that it can be different. But what matters is what happens at the time of crisis. When the crisis hits, do we learn from the mistakes? In the United States, if you come to think of it, take the 19th century. America went through a series of spasms, of crises. Every time they had a financial crisis, they got closer together. They consolidated. They created the Fed. Then after that, they created common institutions under the New Deal by Franklin Roosevelt. Then there was a Great Society in the 1960s. So when they had the crisis in 2008, which we also had, they recovered much more quickly. What are we doing? After the 2010 Euro crisis, we're fragmenting. We're being pushed further apart as Europeans. Instead of coming closer together, the Germans hate the Greeks hate the Germans. Now many Greeks hate other Greeks. Soon the Germans will hate the Germans, just like in the 1920s and 30s. So this is the grand failure.
I agree with that. That would be one of the questions I would have had, because it looks like we are destroying Europe instead of the euro. The currency was meant to unify Europe.
Mm-hmm.
What we have now is exactly the opposite. Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
But if I would take a little bit of Wolfgang Schäuble's position, I would ask you have something like 800 oligarch families in Greece, mm-hmm. which are your 1%, basically, to call it that way. Yes. But how will you tackle that? Or did you tackle it? Did you try to tackle it with Syriza?
Certainly did. And the one thing I was telling Wolfgang, as well as my colleagues in the Eurogroup, was this. I know you don't like us, I would say to him. Yeah. We are, at some point, Wolfgang Schäuble said to me, we've lost trust in your government. You never had it, Wolfgang. You know, we're not only Greeks, but we're also from the radical left. But we would like to build up trust. When the trust is not there, you build it up. And I was trying to convey to my colleagues in Europe that, okay, you may not like a government, but we are sincere. And we have one great advantage. We are not in the pockets of the oligarchy. We have not received a single euro from them. They despise us. They fear us. We may not be very competent. We may be, left-wingers. But at least we are committed to striking them hard. Help us. Help us reform Greece. Break down the cartels. Break down the triangle of sin, as I called it, between bankers, procurement, developers who take contracts from the state, and a Greek highway costs 3 times, 4 times as much as the equivalent German highway, and the media, because that's where all this is the cycle of corruption. Help us break this down. But to do this, we need to understand one thing, collectively as Europeans, that the word reform in Greece is now a dirty word. It's like democracy in Iraq. There's nothing wrong with democracy. But in Iraq, you mention democracy and everybody runs for cover. They think we'll be bombed. Yeah, because under the guise of democracy, the country was destroyed. Mm. Similarly, reforms in Greece are a dirty word. Why? Because the average Greek hears the word reform and says, they will cut my pension, they will increase my VAT, they will increase my taxes, they will cut down unemployment benefit. So it's a catastrophe. Whereas reform should be, the ideal, something that we all want. We all want a reformed Greece. So help us, and my suggestion to them was, let's create a hierarchy of sin. Put the most sinful things that are happening in Greece at the top and attack them. Now, for 5 years before we were elected, they were looking at the pharmacies and whether the pharmacies are efficient or inefficient, whether they should be big supermarket-like pharmacies, whether the bookstores should liberalize prices, which was a catastrophe. They liberalized prices in a way that you haven't done in Germany, so most bookshops shut down now. This is a reform? You want to reform Greece? Attack the oil industry in Greece, the cartel of energy, attack the supermarkets, which maintain huge price-cost margin by effectively exploiting the suppliers. Let's do this together, and let's create a culture of investment by managing our debt in such a way as to bring more investment so we can have more growth and give you back more of the money that you've borrowed from the German taxpayers. That was our agenda, but there was no interest in that. None.
Why? Why?
Because they were far more interested in crushing a government that dared say no.
So I mean, that means that the example of the Syriza government is of course kind of a warning flag for some people, as is Podemos in Spain.
Yes.
And other left-wing movements. Have you felt that in terms of, have you been threatened? You once had to leave Greece with your family.
That was before.
I know, but were there threats against you and the Syriza government, you stop this or either or else?
There was a lot of pressure. There weren't threats at a personal level, and I suspect the difference is that, you know, in 2011, 2012, I was just a university professor. There, the mafia felt more comfortable threatening me. When I was a minister, it was more difficult to do, and actually unnecessary for them. They had the European Central Bank asphyxiating us, reducing day by day the liquidity of our state. And what I think is very important is to see how well the troika of lenders, who were supposedly arguing in favor of reforms for Greece, and the local oligarchs collaborated so well in order to overthrow our government effectively, or to stop our government from saying no to a failed program. I could give you examples of how the Troika intervened in favor of the oligarchy in Greece. So
Give me some examples.
What I find tragic is that the average European outside of Greece thinks that we had a left-wing government that didn't want reforms, and that the Troika was pushing for reforms. It's not true. It's not true. We wanted reforms more than anybody else, because, you know, we represent people who are suffering from the fact that Greece was not reformed, and that we had tax evasion by the rich, and we had this huge corruption. I'll give you one example, and I'm very glad that you're giving me the opportunity to give it to you. Tax evasion.
Okay.
A great scourge in Greece. In the ministry while I was there, we faced the problem that we just didn't have the manpower and womanpower to actually conduct all the checks that we had to conduct in order to catch the tax cheats. But there was a bit of serendipity, of good luck, in the sense that we managed to get access to records of bank transfers for 20 years, internally in Greece and between Greece and the rest of the world, on discs, which is magnificent. Because these people, you know, tax evaders, thought that they were hidden behind the veil of privacy and anonymity. And we set up a task force in the ministry whose purpose was to compare and contrast algorithmically using software, because it's just impossible. We didn't have the human beings to do it. To compare algorithmically those transfers per tax file number against tax returns, declarations of income. And we know that by the end of 2015, we'll be able to catch more than 500,000 major tax cheats. Well, let me tell you that after the referendum of July, and after I resigned, and after the Troika forced the government to surrender, one of the demands of the Troika, which is now law, it's been passed during the summer, one of the reasons why I could no longer be in that parliament or in the party that I served. One of the demands was that that unit gets disbanded and gets incorporated in another unit which has been doing nothing for years. Now, I can assure you that the list of the many thousands of tax sheets would include the major oligarchs. What on earth was the Troika doing, stopping this project? Now, of course, they dress it up that they are going to create an autonomous tax office that will be all singing, all dancing, will have all sorts of capacities. Why stop this now?
That is, did you leave because of this?
I left because I was never going to sign an agreement for taking on another 85 billion, another loan from European taxpayers, knowing we will not repay it.
That's what you said at the beginning.
True.
Yeah.
But after that, I knew that, of course, look, the oligarchs and the Troika were always in cahoots. You could see that. Who were the greatest opponents of our government and of our negotiating with the Troika? The oligarchs in Greece. If you read their newspapers that they own, they are oligarchically owned newspapers, that they were, during the war, my mother used to say this to me, they were black marketeers who during the conflict in North Africa used to say, basta Rommel, that is, Rommel, hang on, because they feared that if the Wehrmacht left Greece, they would not lose their black market profits. So the oligarchs were, basta Troika. They were supportive completely of the Troika line and lambasting us and me personally. Every time I would say to the Troika, for instance, that we need to reduce tax rates in order to have more tax. Because the problem in Greece is we have tax rates that are very high and people do not pay it because A, they can't afford to, and secondly, given that it's so high, they feel that it's legitimate not to pay it, that it's just appallingly high tax rates. So the oligarchy and the Troika have always been very closely knit. This is something that Northern Europeans do not understand. They think that the Troika wants reforms and they're against the oligarchy. Let me just finish this point by saying this to you. And this is something Prime Minister Tsipras used to say, and I approved 100% his constant repetition of that between January and July when we were in the same government. He used to say that he does not remember one occasion between 2010 and 2015 when the Troika threatened a previous Greek government that liquidity will be switched off because the government was not attacking the oligarchy. Never. They would threaten governments, the socialist government, the conservative government, of Samaras or Papandreou, and they would actually switch off liquidity if they didn't cut pensions, if they didn't increase VAT fast enough. But never did they say to them, look, if you do not get the oil cartel, we'll switch off liquidity. Why?
Okay, that is an important point. That leads me to another thing. When I read, or when I read German newspapers, watched German TV, then I got a completely different picture of the situation in Greece than when I would go to American newspapers or British, but more American. It was like on the American side, you were considered a professor of economics knowing what you say, while in Germany you were somebody who should be slapped a little so he gets reasonable again. That's near closely a quote that we had on German TV. So what do you think, what is wrong, or maybe I put it in a question, is there something wrong with the media system? Did they portray the ideas in a way that the audience could understand what your position was, what the European Eurogroup position was, and let's say what the outside position was from USA?
I have to say that the greatest disappointment I felt was the lack of an opportunity to communicate with the people in Germany, my position. I never had that opportunity. I remember I gave a talk here in Berlin on the 8th of June. I had a large audience, German audience. There weren't Greeks there, Greek nationals. It was German audience. And I felt it was a genuinely good conversation. Not that they agreed with me, but it was a genuinely helpful exchange that I learned from, and I think the audience learned from. And then I saw the way it was reported. It was the cheapest, most yellow, ridiculous portrayal that did no justice, not even to the German audience who were there and who had, put very good questions to me. This incapacity to engage in a dialogue in Europe is detrimental to the quality of European democracy. Now, I have to tell you something that relates to your juxtaposition between the United States and Germany. This is something I say for the first time. I'm going to write about it, but I'm just going to mention it in passing now. In April 2015, when I was in Washington, as part of the IMF spring meetings, I was warned by very high-standing officials of the United States government that I would be facing a character assassination attempt in Brussels and in Berlin. And I was even told when it would happen. That it would happen towards the end of April. And lo and behold, on the 24th of April, when there was the Riga, famous Eurogroup in Riga, it happened. There were tweets and there were reports in the European media, which then sipped into the Anglo-Saxon media as well, that were utterly inaccurate about what was being said in the Riga Eurogroup meeting, but that became an avalanche of just subterfuge and lies about me, about what was said to me, about my colleagues, and supposedly their narrative against me. Now, when we have a Eurogroup which is informal, subject to no rules, you and our audience do not have the right to read the minutes. Not today, not in 30 years, not in 100 years, because they are not kept. So you will never be able to ascertain what happened, how these big decisions were taken, who said what. That is astonishing. That is preposterous. It's something to rebel over.
Is it by default or is it a mistake? What do you think?
No, it's by design. It's by design. There is a rule of confidentiality, even though there are no rules. And so, think about it. At some point I came out and said, listen, nobody said what you guys, you journalists are reporting that was said. And a month later, I was up to here and said, you know what, I have the tape. I recorded what was going on in there. Mm. But I play by the rules. I was probably the only one who respected confidentiality. I never got out there to tell fibs about what was being said. I kept it completely to myself. But I had a recording, and I still have it, of what was being said. And I was being lambasted for having taped it.
Exactly.
Even though I never released that tape, which I could, and then I would have shown them all up for the lies they've been writing about what was said in there. Now, why did I keep that tape? I'll tell you why. And I taped every single meeting. Because it was my moral duty to do it. Because my country's fortunes relied on, were hanging on my shoulder. You know what it is to be in a meeting that lasts 10 hours? You come out of it, you're so dazed and confused. The stress, the intensity is just mind-boggling. You come out and the Prime Minister asks you, so what happened? It's not easy. Of course I told him what happened. But no record, no minutes to go back to. I needed that recording for myself in order to remind myself of who said, somebody in Parliament asked me once, did you say that? So I had to go back and check exactly the words that I used, because after this intensity and pressure, one forgets. Believe me, we're human beings, we are not machines. So this is the state of our democracy, this is the state of journalism, and this is the juxtaposition between the United States and Europe.
I was, as I said, I was very astonished. One thing every German noticed was that we were never asked about the euro, the population. But then all these institutions, but maybe because not many people in Germany know that. So you have the European Central Bank, you have the International Monetary Fund and the Troika, you have this task force. Maybe you can give us, I asked that before, but a short idea. What was Greece met with? What came to your country in terms of undemocratic institutions which are under no control but rule?
It was worse than that. It was not just a troika of unelected officials that came and imposed upon us policies that the German people were not familiar with, the French people are not familiar with. This is bad enough, but it was worse than that. Well, firstly, let me just make this point that we had, if you read the memorandum of understanding that Alexis Tsipras was forced to sign in the end, and I refused to sign, so that's why I'm not together with Alexis Tsipras anymore. If you read this, I actually have a copy of it on my website with annotation, my own comments on it, because Troika speak is a different language. Even if you speak English, it's a different language. So, for instance, it says things like, the Greek authorities agreed to implement intragenerational justice. You know what this means?
No.
Reducing pensions. So you need to speak the language. It's like Orwellian.
It's a little bit Orwellian.
Yeah, double speak. If you read that document, you'll find that Greece is being micromanaged. Not just macromanaged, but micromanaged to the last detail. And indeed, the text says that the Greek authorities commit, firstly, to agreeing with the institutions. What? Even if you don't agree, you're committing to agree. But the institutions do not commit to agreeing with the Greek government. No, it's one way. So if I agree to agree with you, and you don't agree to agree with me, it means you are my dictator. Yeah, that's what it means, right? Okay? And also to agree that the institutions must approve any and every piece of legislation that goes through Greek parliament. This is just a complete, not even a protector, it's a colony. Yeah? It's a dead colony.
Yeah, it's
a dead colony.
That is really the term that came to my mind when I saw that. And it's also the kind of the language that was used in the German newspapers. Yeah. For example, our tabloid Bild-Zeitung, which was depicting the Greek as kind of a tribal society where we have to put order in.
Yeah? The white man's burden is what the British called their calling to change the empire and make it Christian and good. But you know, at least the British built railways as well as in India. The Troika is destroying what's there. You know? It's not only that it's dictatorial, it's also very, very inefficient. But the point I want to make is something that you may not know of, or the audience may not know of. The Troika was not even coherent. So the Troika was fragmented. So you talked to the head of the ECB, you got one line, one argument. You talk to the head of the IMF, a completely different argument. So, for instance, you know, the IMF believed that the Greek debt had to be haircut, had to be reduced. Right? You talk to the Commission, they will say, no, there's no way, Berlin will never agree with that. Then the central bank had its own concerns. Who do you talk to? You know, you are completely caught out by this disagreement amongst your dictators. So you have a team of dictators, and they disagree with one another. And it's not only horizontal, but it's also vertical, the fragmentation.
But why the 18-0 vote then? Why the 18-0 vote, for example?
Okay. That is very important to understand. What happened, what began in Greece in 2010 has changed Europe permanently and in a way that has nothing to do with Greece. So take the Eurogroup. If you were to be a little bird flying above the table, what you would see is a rectangular table where the finance ministers are sitting on the long sides of the rectangle and the Troika is sitting on the shorter sides. So on the one side is the president of the Eurogroup, Mr. Dijsselbloem presently. Next to him is his deputy, Thomas Wieser, who represents the Euro Working Group. On the other side is Paul Thompson, who represents the IMF, or Christine Lagarde, if she happens to be in town. So there is the IMF sitting there, playing a crucial role in all issues, right? Not just issues that concern Greece. Everything that happens in the Eurozone is decided by means of this decision-making process, which involves the International Monetary Fund. And on the other side of the table is the European Central Bank, Mario Draghi, Benoît Cœuré, and the Commission, which is the least significant part of the Troika. They've been completely downgraded. So, you know, their opinion counts for next to nothing. They speak, nobody listens. Yeah. So, the ministers, that's another point of the utmost importance, are always in the dark. There was never a single piece of paper distributed to us, no agenda, no numbers. So we would be talking about the Spanish national budget, we'd be talking about the Greek negotiation in the dark. The only people who knew were the IMF, the ECB, and the Commission. And they would make a presentation, they would talk first. Every time there is an issue, you know, the first to speak is the Moscovici representing the Commission. This is a relic of the past. Then Draghi representing the central bank. Then it is Thompson representing the IMF. And then the minister of the country that is being discussed. And then anybody else who wants to say anything, they can do, and they do, on the basis of ignorance. Complete ignorance. They have nothing in front of them. It's whatever it is they've heard. And what they've heard is just 10-minute speeches that are, you know, we think that Spain is doing very well and they're doing what they're being told, or Greece is not doing as it's being told and needs to be crushed. You know, I'm joking now, but you know what I mean. And that's it. And then they move to the next subject. So the Eurogroup is not even making any decisions. At least the finance ministers are. So all the decisions are made by people that German people, citizens, French citizens, Slovenian citizens, Greek citizens have not elected. That design, if I were, let's say we were in 1980 now, and we're having a discussion about how we should form our Europe, and I were to suggest this to you, you would rightly accuse me of being crazy, of being dangerous, of being a fool that should be confined to prison forever, for having dared to suggest something like that would be so catastrophic for Europe. But this is the reality we have now. It is important. You may think, I'm looking at the audience now, you may think that I'm the former finance minister of a government that you dislike. Okay, fine. I'm no longer a finance minister, you got rid of me, as Matteo Renzi said. But you haven't gotten rid of the Eurogroup. The Eurogroup rules your lives in Germany, in France, in Holland, in Finland, in Portugal. And the Eurogroup operates along those lines. No rules, finance ministers that are impotent and who simply replicate the mantra. So you ask me, why is it 18-1? Well, it's 19-0 now, because I'm not there anymore. Okay? But it's like the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. You know, Brezhnev would come to the Politburo and they would all raise their arms together. Now, of course, if you ask them separately, do you agree, disagree, maybe nobody agreed. But the European Union is replicating in a dastardly way the Soviet. Thankfully, we don't have the Gulag or the KGB. Great. That's a good thing.
I'm not sure about that.
Well, we don't have the Gulag. Not yet.
No Gulag. Okay.
If you allow Golden Dawn to rise up, we will have the Gulag as well. And everything that we are doing to Greece is a great gift to the Golden Dawn fascists.
That is, I'd like to come to the point because we have about 15 minutes left. And the point is what to do. What you describe is kind of an undemocratic structure. And you came up with what you call Plan B. What does Plan B mean? And what is your proposal?
Well, even though I'm a radical left-winger.
Are you not a Keynesian? Keynesian, it's in English?
I am that as well. I'm confused. I like being confused because if you're not confused, you're not thinking. Remember, Einstein said that. I'm not confused. I'm eclectic. Okay. So I borrow ideas from von Hayek, from Mises, from Keynes, from Marx, from Friedman, from Thatcher, from whoever has good ideas to give me. But the reason why I'm left-wing is because I cannot see how the accumulation of financialized capital can be made compatible with a good society. But that's a big discussion, it's not for now. You asked me about what needs to be done. Yeah, this is your question?
Exactly. What is Plan B?
Okay, firstly, you heard me describe the Eurozone and the Eurogroup in very critical terms. I wish we had not created it, because it was a design that was bound to fail. And its failure would bring large human costs upon Europeans, everywhere, in Germany as well. However, we have to be sensible and reasonable and pragmatic. Once you create the common currency area, you can't go back to where you were. So dismantling it would bring us back to the 1930s. So what's happening in Greece now would happen to Germany as well. Germany is not in a good state, but it's not Greece. If we dismantle the euro today, you may become like us. You don't want that, we don't want that, nobody wants that. So I have a very simple, pragmatic answer. We need to fix the euro. What does that mean? Well, ideally, it would be fantastic to have a button, press it, and create the United States of Europe. So we could have a federal government that issues its treasury bills on behalf of all Europeans. And
that's a big question. And Confederate or federal?
Federal.
Yeah.
We have a confederation now.
Yeah.
It's not working.
Okay.
We have a confederation de facto. We have a common currency. We have a common central bank. Nobody is free to pursue policies independent of anybody else. So we have a confederacy. We are where the United States used to be in the early part of the 19th century, but without Congress. So it's worse. Yeah?
Okay.
Now, ideally, as I said, we should become the United States of Europe. But unfortunately, this crisis is not bringing us further together.
It's splitting us.
It's splitting us. So what I think we need to do, independently of whether we're left-wing, right-wing, we should agree on two things. Firstly, it's important to end the crisis. And to end the crisis, we need to find smart ways of using the existing institutions that we have, the Central Bank of Europe, the European Stability Mechanism, and now this is a very long discussion on how this can be done. I'm convinced it can be done. I can talk ad infinitum about what needs to be done. But we can use existing institutions within a few weeks to stabilize the political economy of the Eurozone. And the next phase should then be to democratize the Eurogroup and to have a situation where I would very much like the opportunity to vote for a German federal treasurer. And I would like German citizens to have the opportunity to vote for a Greek federal treasurer. Not that they would, but for the opportunity. To create a process whereby first we simulate the kind of mechanisms, stabilization mechanisms that the Americans have, like a degree of Europeanization of part of the debt of each member state, a proper banking union. If you have 200,000 euros now in Greece, okay, they are not worth the same as if you had it in Frankfurt. They have completely different value. Because the Greek banks, firstly, we have capital controls, so it's not mobile. Yeah?
Okay.
And secondly, even if we remove capital controls, the threat of a bail-in of the Cyprus solution, where the state simply takes a part of your savings, is much greater in Greece than it is in Germany. So a euro here and euro there is not the same euro. That is pathetic. It just goes to show that this is not a proper monetary union. So we need a proper banking union. We need a common anti-poverty fighting fund, which could be funded from the target 2 profits of the European system of central banks. And what we also need, and that is absolutely essential for Germany, not just for Greece, a very large scale, 7 to 8% of total national income for the Eurozone investment project to be run by the European Investment Bank in conjunction with the European Central Bank. The mere announcement of these measures would bring Europe closer together. And then we can start building common institutions for a political union, but not the political union that Wolfgang Schäuble wants. Because for him, this is just, as I see it, a way of disciplining France and continuing the Franco-German conflict, which has been going on for a while now, with Greece, Portugal, Ireland as collateral damage. That is not the way to resolve the crisis.
It's also in a way you're trying to work together with Oscar Lafontaine and Cobain in England and France, Italy, the left-wing parties. I did interviews in the USA where I was told, even in the Reagan government, that Lafontaine was the #1 enemy that they targeted. Because of his ideas then. Yeah? So what you run into is not only problems in Europe, but also maybe problems with Americans. If there are proposals that could lead to a stronger European zone, that's not exactly what they want.
Oh, it is what they want.
Then
Things have
tell us
changed
about it.
since Reagan.
Okay.
Look, the Americans suffered a major crisis in 2008. And they did what they could within their own constraints to recover from it. What they did contained many errors, indeed some crimes as well, the way that they allowed Wall Street bankers to be let off the hook. But nevertheless, especially under the Obama administration, they understand the nature of the problem. And for them, the inability of Europe to come to terms with the euro crisis is a major problem. They would love to see, Washington would love Europe to recover in the way that I described before. So whereas people like Oscar and myself back in the 80s were the great devil in Washington under Reagan, this is no longer the case. I can assure you that when I have discussions with American officials, about these ideas, about what Europe should do, they say, yes, you're right. So, this is an optimistic conclusion, because there is a possibility of bringing Europe and America back together in terms of synchronizing macroeconomic policies. At the moment, Europe is anchorless. I believe that even Wolfgang Schäuble understands that the Eurozone we have will not be able to withstand the next crisis, that it is not viable. So we all agree that we need to change the basic structure. I believe that Chancellor Merkel, Wolfgang Schäuble, Weidmann, they all understand that the Eurogroup, the way it functions, is dysfunctional. And also, it creates a great legitimization problem, as Habermas would say, from the perspective of European citizens. The question is, what do we do? How do we fix this? The current CDU government's view on this, with the SPD playing second fiddle, is that what we need is to tighten the rules and to have a political union, the purpose of which will be to be stricter in the application of the rules. This is not going to succeed, because those rules are not good rules. Mm. They are rules that are impossible to maintain. So if you try through greater disciplinarianism to impose rules that cannot be imposed, then you end up with economic failure and a crisis of democracy, more authoritarianism. This is why we need to reconstitute the rules. There are very simple things we can do. Very simple things we can do. Things that we don't have the time to go into now. But things that, you mentioned the Americans. American Republicans, Democrats, even people from the Tea Party would agree with. And that is the optimistic dimension that left, right, America, Europe, we could agree on a program that would stabilize Europe.
My final question would be, there is a very big picture, which is the One Belt, One Road thing of China, which wants to create an economic zone together with Russia from not really Lisbon to Vladivostok, but rather Berlin to Peking, something like that. On the other hand, we have the American movement of TTIP and Trans-Pacific Partnership. What is your view on that? Is that so contradictory that it's either or? We hardly hear about that at all, about the Chinese proposal, but maybe you can give us a rough outline on your opinion.
Look, my take on China is slightly different. I think that the Chinese are being very sensible, have been very sensible now for a while. They do not want conflict with the West. Indeed, after 2008, they played a very significant role in stabilizing the West. Think about it, how did Germany manage to maintain its export drive while the European periphery was collapsing? Through China. And why did all these Mercedes-Benzes were sold to China and all these pieces of machinery get exported to China? Because the Chinese authorities understood that to stabilize their own social economy, they had to create a bubble within China based on real estate, wherein the investment ratio went up to 50%. Out of every euro that is being produced of income in China, 50 cents is invested, which is a preposterous amount. I mean, it's not sustainable. They know it. That way, Germany did very well out of China since 2008 to 2015. And China was trying to play the role of the stabilizer while America was recovering and Europe was recovering. But Europe did not do its part. So now the Chinese bubble, which was always going to deflate, is deflating, and that's creating tensions.
So you see it as one big economic system. It's not contradictory.
Of course not.
Okay.
Of course it is one big economic system. Germany without China would have now been in a Great Depression.
I mean, China and Russia.
Russia is relatively insignificant.
Okay, but on the strategic level, it's. I think. Do you think the Americans want to collaborate with China, or is it competition for being?
Well, look, they need China. They need China desperately, but at the same time, they're trying to isolate it through TTP now.
It's not part of the Trans-Pacific Partnership that they want to create.
That's a tragedy.
Isn't that who's going to be master of the world?
I don't think the Chinese see it this way. The Chinese do not have a hegemonic streak
No, but the Americans may have.
The Americans certainly do. And it's not so much Washington, it's American multinationals who want to be the ones that have the patents, and the ones that actually write the regulatory rules, the rules that regulate various industries, the specifications, the standards. They want to be the ones that determine the legal status of the patents that go with the biotech industry and all that. And they want to impose upon the Chinese a constant subservient role. China has a great disadvantage as far as I'm concerned, that is the authoritarianism and the political illiberalism.
Of course.
But from an economic point of view, I believe that China has been very enlightened, the way it's been looking at its place in the world. It doesn't want to dominate. It simply wants to be allowed, in the greater scheme of things, to develop and to maintain the rate of growth which is essential to keep the Chinese social economy stable. The greatest fear that Beijing has is that it will become like Russia, implode under the way that Russia imploded under Yeltsin. They need to maintain a growth rate between 5 and 7% to prevent that. They've been doing their utmost to stabilize global capitalism through increasing investment. And the reason why Germany today has not collapsed after the collapse of the European periphery is because China has looked after Germany. In the way that the United States looked after Germany in the 1950s, China has been doing it since 2008, through creating a bubble of its own. So this attempt to encircle China by the United States, both economically through TPP and also militarily, is a great source of concern for me. We are one global village, and we should plan it in the way that the New Dealers planned it in 1944 in Bretton Woods.
Okay. Professor Varoufakis, I thank you very much. We had some extraordinary statements, like a federation of Europe, which we should become. I didn't think I would hear that from you, on a big outlook on the global scene. And I hope we too don't end up as the doctor and the journalist and the movie Z, which is one of my favorites. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks.
kenfm.de